Yeah, there we are. Okay. And I'm just going to make sure and check that we are on LinkedIn. So anyone who's immediately joining us today, go ahead and tell us what kind of a clinician you are, where you're joining us from. Do you know about Olus already? And do you know Declan? I think this is always an interesting time of the day and the week to kind of hop on. I assume that most people are just maybe taking an early lunch break. A couple of people definitely do join on just past 12 noon. So it's always an interesting timing, and we sometimes get questions, sometimes not. But a lot of people lurk on LinkedIn, and a lot of people watch this later on LinkedIn as well. Across all platforms, I think that I have the highest views on LinkedIn. I would have never imagined,
Yeah.
more than Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, we are. So yeah, it looks like we are live, and I'm just going to quickly once again invite everyone to just put down what kind of a clinician you are, and if you've got any questions for us, then do put them in the chat in the comments here. And I'm going to kick us off with a short introduction. Oh, I can see people joining. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Drop in the comments where you're joining us from, who you are, and any questions for Declan. We're going to take them towards the end. But welcome to episode 27 of the Clinician Founder Podcast, where we explore how clinicians are building expert led, mission driven ventures that are reshaping healthcare from the inside out. I'm your host, Dr. Shubhendu Kulshreshtha, an executive coach and an emergency physician, helping clinicians become founders so that they can make medicine their side hustle. Today's guest is Dr. Declan Kelly, a former NHS doctor turned software engineer, and now the founder and CEO of Olus Medical, the team behind tools used across leading hospitals in the UK and clinical guidance app that many of us open on every shift. In this episode, we're going to unpack how Declan went from ward rounds to writing code, then to leading a product and engineering team that ships software hospitals actually use. We're going to get into finding product market fit, what it's like building with engineers, selling to trusts, lessons from acquiring microguide, and scaling responsibly. So, if you've ever thought, I use this every day, surely there's going to be a better way to do it, this conversation it might just be your blueprint. Oh, and if you haven't already, follow the Clinician Founder Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever else you'd like to listen to. Let's get into it. Thanks so much for joining me today, Declan. How are you?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, it's always amazing to have really cool founders on this podcast, clinician founders especially, and sharing the journey with us. So I appreciate you taking the time and inspiring our guests, and I'm really excited to get into the journey of all this. I think I came across you first, probably listening to another podcast at the time when I thought I was gonna jump ship into management consulting, and I was listening everything health tech, and I had a conversation, and I heard you talk about the origins of the word Olus and where it comes from and what you were working on, and this was way before you had even taken over Microguide. So I've been following you from the OG days, and we've kind of been back and forth on emails, and it's really exciting for me to have you on the podcast today. So yeah, honestly, thank you for being here. For our guests, why don't we start with perhaps sharing your career journey, what you do now, and what is Olus?
Yeah, of course, no problem at all. Yeah, and as I said, thanks so much again for inviting me on. So, yeah, I'm Declan. I'm a medical doctor by background. I worked clinically in the NHS for about 5 years, mostly in emergency medicine. I'm also a software engineer as well, so always had a fascination with how technology can shape industries and healthcare in particular. So, I was always coding and building things in spare time, but never really foresaw that I was going to go down the path of launching a company. Essentially, we were just trying to code and build a solution for our own hospital with the problems that we were facing. And ultimately, when myself and my colleagues we were treating patients, we found it very difficult to access the knowledge or information that we needed when we needed it. And this is, context specific knowledge, i.e., for this hospital, what is the next step in this patient's journey? What is the pathway for STEMI? How do we activate the cath lab, etc. All of that really practical knowledge, the day to day information. So we coded up a platform for our own hospital, found that in 6 months it was being used in 28 hospitals around the world, including Stanford and a number of others. So we realized, oh, this is a pretty ubiquitous problem. Let's do a bit of research. Did some research and found that there are over 2 billion medical decisions made every single day. So it's about 23,000 medical decisions made every single second for patients globally. And the vast majority of time, the world's medical knowledge or the context specific medical knowledge that you need is not queried for those decisions. So it just makes our lives really, really difficult to try to find that information. You're usually having to, wrestle with SharePoint or ask colleagues or not be able to find it. So that's really why we launched Olus. And Olus is the Irish word for knowledge or information. So that's where it comes from. We probably should have chosen a name that people can say easily, because it is we get a lot of different pronunciations for it. So the easiest way is if you think about dropping the E and just Olas. That's the easiest way to think about pronouncing it. So yeah, since we launched it, we launched the product about 3 years ago. It's now live in over 500 sites. So over 80% of all acute hospitals in the NHS use it in at least one or two departments, and multiple use it across the hospital. And then in the US, it's used by over 40,000 users across, as I said, places like Stanford, Mass General, and a number of others. So we're really excited about the path that this knowledge mobilization journey has taken us on.
That's very, very cool. Like it's got all of the classic markers for a really clinician driven venture of like, here's a really big pain point and we're going to try really hard to solve it. And oh wait, it actually is solving so much more and is so much bigger of a problem than we ever imagined. Could you take us back to that first kind of MVP or model you made for your own hospital? How did it end up kind of spreading to all of these other 28 sites?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think it really is the very, very first inception of this is ultimately kind of trying to digitize and consolidate what we normally would have in WhatsApp groups or pictures that we've taken at the protocols on the wall or screenshots, etc. Because like a lot of time you're scrolling through your photos and you're like, oh, I remember where the massive transfusion protocol was. It was here, and I'm trying to find it. So I built it initially just to solve that problem, ultimately for ourselves and our own department. And very quickly then a few hospitals that were nearby and local hospitals asked for it as well, and they wanted to use it. Did some posting on social media about it, and that's where actually Stanford had seen it first of all. So that's really what triggered the, oh wait a minute, this is a big problem that happens not just in our own hospital and happens in hospitals all around the world. So that's kind of when we realized that what seemed like a small problem actually is quite a big problem. If you follow that the whole way down to this idea of 2 billion medical decisions being made every day, you realize that this is a really significant problem. And it's now coming full circle back to the point of, okay, if we aggregate all this knowledge, how do we first of all make it machine readable? So how do we make it embedded at the point of care as well? So that's really the path that we're on now with those things. So it's really just started with the inception of, hey, multiple times a day, I don't know this thing. I don't know what the number is for this, for this department, or I don't know the referral pathway for this condition. So multiple times a day, you're hit with that kind of information, and that just slows you down and means your decision-making processes are inefficient. So it's what seems like a very simple problem actually makes you realize actually knowledge mobilization is a very difficult topic in general.
I mean, I'm hearing those emergency medicine traits in you there because, amongst the chaos and amongst everything being thrown at us in the emergency department, the one thing we've kind of hold on to is like, what are we trying to achieve here? And I'm constantly hearing that it's about the implementation of knowledge. You've got the resources, you've got the data, but how do you actually bring that to take action when you're in the emergency department? And I can see that's where you've began, and that's where you are now, and that's where Olus is heading to in the future, and that's just like very, very exciting for me. So I suppose if anyone hasn't yet downloaded Olus, they probably have been forced to because of your acquisition of Microguide, which I'm really interested to get into in the future. But in those early days, was it? It sounds like it almost happened by chance that all of these other hospitals wanted it. Did you kind of get sucked into the whole NHS buying cycle and regulations and rules? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, so I suppose that's a great question. I suppose a few things from the very, very start, especially with the very initial iteration of the product. So it's not a medical device, number one, and number two, it doesn't store any patient data. So there's no sensitive information on the platform. So it stores internal tacit knowledge and protocols and procedures. The platform itself is extremely secure. Everything's encrypted, etc. So we adhere to the highest level of standards from regards to governance, cybersecurity. But it doesn't actually store any patient data. So because of that, there are generally some of the big barriers to getting health tech adopted. And we were in the fortunate position that we didn't have either a regulatory burden initially or a storing patient data, because it means that the cycles go a lot longer. So what this allows to happen is it allows individual departments to have much more autonomy on kind of the smaller tools that they would use inside their own department. and that allows you to develop evidence proof points that it actually works at the point of care. So
Mm.
from there, we then said, okay, what is the evidence that we need to generate then to prove this actually is beneficial to health system? And there are two big pillars of evidence that we've consistently generated. One is the efficiency gains. So this is 9 times faster than any other current system that's used. So whether it's the
Wow.
intranet or whether it's SharePoint or whatever, we've proven that it's 9 times faster. If you look at a few different studies for health systems, individual doctors spend about 65 hours per year just searching for internal clinical guidelines, policies, and procedures. That's not like using the EHR or any other systems. It's just searching for their internal content.
Yeah.
And that equates to, around about £1.5 million or $2 million of spend per health system per year. And we reduce, the search time by 90%. So we're able to give back time to clinicians, and we're able to prove that as well. The other aspect then is this governance and compliance aspect. So all the platform is extremely rich with granular data with regards to the insights. So how
Mm.
often policies, protocols are being used, what doctors are searching for, can they find the information that they need, etc., etc., and then full historic record of the policies, version control, etc. So hospitals then have the confidence to know that all of our policies are in one place. We know exactly who's accessing them. We know how often they're being used, and we know our doctors are accessing them more. So it increases governance and compliance. Now,
Yeah.
ideally, down the line, what we want to prove is that has a direct impact on the quality of patient care. Obviously, that's very difficult to prove, but I think that's the implicit assumption that a lot of hospitals make. If doctors are using evidence-based care more often, you
Mm.
have better quality of care, reduced morbidity, reduced mortality, and more efficient decision making. So that's really that's how we kind of started that process of one single department, prove it out, then it starts getting used in other departments, and then the hospital as a whole says this is actually quite useful. Here's all the evidence; it's safely proven, and
Mm.
then they get it for their whole hospital essentially. And that's the kind of repeatable pattern that we've noticed over the last number of years and
Yeah.
months.
Very, very cool. I think selling to doctors is always extremely difficult, and selling into healthcare comes with so many more challenges. I want to dive a little bit deeper into just that proving the efficiencies bit, because I'm sure there's many of our listeners who have early MVPs, or perhaps they've vibe coded an initial product and they want to start thinking about like how do they actually showcase its value, and all of those bits. What are perhaps some of the top tips to showcase like what is the ROI on the investment, or what are the tangible and non-tangible benefits of having the product from everything Olus has been through?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think as you said, the democratization of all of these tools now to build things into vibe code are there to test hypotheses. I think it would be remiss of me not to caveat that with like that's what those tools are for, and that's it. They're not for production ready software.
Yes.
They're not privacy compliant. They're not secure from a cybersecurity point of view, but they're good for initial iteration and sandbox testing to prove a value prop, as you said,
Mm.
how to get to product market fit. I think doing that is good. So the more democratization of access to those tools, the better, because it gives clinicians power to actually test hypotheses. Once you've tested the hypothesis and realize this is a problem and this solution looks like it is the solution to this problem, that's when the software needs to be built in a way that's secure, that's compliant,
Mm.
etc. That's might sound like a very boring point, but it's a very important point because
Yeah.
you feel like you get a lot very quickly, and then it feels like trying to make sure that you're regulatorily compliant and compliant with cybersecurity. It feels like that's slowing you down, a step backwards, and you're looking at the US, which is moving so fast, etc. But it's a
Yeah.
really important step to actually building this long-term business and be taken seriously. So, but yeah, so the idea of then building that value prop, I think the key point is find a clinical champion. I think that's the key point. So someone internally in that hospital or trust or department needs to have felt the pain so strongly that they want to solve this problem, and that they'll be an advocate for your solution as a solution to that problem. And I think be relentlessly problem obsessed. I think it's if that clinician or that internal clinical champion says this is a really big problem, we need to find a solution. That's the most important thing. Them specifically choosing your solution, or if they start to look for other competitors, that's a good thing, because it means that you will
Mm.
try to serve the clinicians even better than any other competitors. But it's framing it through focusing on, have I solved this internal clinical champion's problem, and then they become an advocate for it. Now, ideally, and you to then build a scalable business, there needs to be a scalable, repeatable pattern of those clinical champions. That
Yeah.
problem needs to have occurred in multiple departments or multiple hospitals at scale, and there needs to be a commercial health economic value to actually solving that problem as well, or
Mm.
else you don't have a business. So But the very first thing, the core focus is find one internal clinical champion that's not part of your company, and help prove out a value prop with that person.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you're not taking the responsibility for showing what problem it exactly solves, but you're leaving that to the adopting team to say, here's what I would use it for, and if I did use it, this is what it would be worth.
Yeah.
It's really interesting as you say this. I'm remembering probably early 2020, sorry, late 2020, 21, just post COVID. I was at Reading, and I was working on a project very similar to this, and because we had limited number of computers, we'd always be finding a space. We'd go see patients, we'd want to come back and find the hospital guidelines. There were fantastic hospital guidelines, and I got myself involved in this QI project to say, we're not using these guidelines enough, we need to be accessing them more often. And I said, well, the problem is that we don't have bedside access to them. If we were at the bedside, we could just pull out our phone and maybe have a look at them and figure out which guidelines we need to do, make a patient plan, you know off they go.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my search began for there must be an existing platform like this that does it. At that time, I believe Microguide was also opening up a couple of other things beyond just doing antimicrobial guidelines. They were making it possible. And that's how I kind of got involved. And then have been following your journey at the same time as well. So the implementation piece was definitely a challenge. And in that project, the way I had kind of summarized was I was literally time tracking how long every clinician took to get from the patient back to the computer, wrestle with SharePoints, as you mentioned, find the right guideline, go back to the patient or the consultant, have that discussion, and then compare that to them being able to have it at the bedside. And you're right, like that was serious number of clinician hours that was saved. I mean, that was worth being able to hire an extra 2 clinicians a month or something like that, that it came to. So there's huge value proposition on the other end. That's very, very cool. Take us to the next phase. So that early phase where you develop this product, you were clearly solving a big problem. You managed to have some benefits in that regulatory and adoption space in the sales cycle. Where did you get to next? When did you kind of formalize the company, grow a team, and all of those bits?
Yeah, so I suppose I initially registered the company technically, so I was still working clinically, and then I launched an initial MVP of the product while I was working full time clinically, and then I dropped half time clinically, and it got to the point where I needed to pick one or the other. The platform was used in 28 hospitals, and they were start relying on it on a frequent basis, so I had to then choose. Actually, that's where my attention was, and that I suppose that was a big step. I really missed medicine, and I missed a lot of aspects of it. But I think that's a necessary step that needs to happen. It's very very difficult to do 2 to 3 days a week clinically and run a business to the level that the customers need you to run that business and the clients need you to
Mm,
run that business. So you have to accept the responsibility of that too. So, but there's large aspects of clinical work that I definitely miss. But the how that then started scaling, then it's very much scaled organically from multiple departments to other departments, and either within hospitals they would see the emergency departments using it and they find that it's quite useful for their department, so they would reach out, or from one emergency department in a hospital to a different hospital's emergency department, if that makes sense, because as emergency medicine
rotating
colleagues,
doctors.
you're more likely to talk maybe sometime to other emergency medicine doctors in other hospitals than you are to the same hospital specialties. So
Yeah.
we started seeing that it spread organically throughout those hospitals, and that helped us hone the product. That helped us then get feedback around what was working, what wasn't working, and we're still constantly iterating on adding features and functionality, and seeing what other problems that we could solve for these departments.
Yeah. Could you kind of share some insights into the approach to pricing your product? Perhaps in the early days, what were some of the mistakes you made, and where are you now with how you think about pricing?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So, I suppose that the pricing has to be commensurate to the value that you're providing for the system as a whole. And even though I'd say that there we time reduction by 90%, there's still a lot to pull out of that. Does that $1.8 million actually then get repurposed or used elsewhere? This is the big conversation now with ambient voice technologies. Yes, you're saving an
Mm,
enormous amount of time, but does that actually increase patient throughput? Does that actually increase the efficiency of the system and downstream effects of that? So you have to be able to measure all of those side of things as well. So the other aspect of then is what can a department pay, or what can a hospital pay, and what budget does it come from? So I
mm,
think the big thing that the thing that we had come from, which was working clinically on the shop floor, into navigating through either procurement or through hospital buying procedures, It was finding where those pockets of budgets actually live, who has autonomous control over those budgets, what are the level of those budgets, and then what value do you have for those people that hold those budgets as well. So it's trying to navigate through that. And I think that's nearly as difficult as finding product market fit. I kind of call it business model market fit as such. So you have to nail
Yeah.
product market fit, and then in healthcare, it's the same in lots of industries. You have to nail your go to market and your business model market fit. But
Hmm.
healthcare is specific. It's very specifically true for that point as well. Because there can be someone that might be able to buy it, but they don't have the budget, et cetera, et cetera. So it's navigating through and finding where the budgets are for this type of stuff, and what you're able to prove that budget's buying essentially.
Okay. And how do you kind of get yourself in front of these people, or do you again rely on those clinical champions to
Yeah.
get you there?
I think fundamentally from the starting point, it's the clinical champions that get you there, and then you kind of work your way up from there. There needs to be people internally that are advocating for the solution. I think now at our point, we're going more of a top down approach and doing trust wide sales and things like that. So, but
Mm.
it's very difficult to do one without the other, as in you have to gather the evidence, but you can't gather evidence without being in. So you have to find a way that works for your solution. As I
Mm.
said, from our point of view, we had a solution that wasn't a medical device and didn't deal with patient data. Therefore, it's the barrier to getting it used is lower than something that is a medical device or stores lots of patient data. So, you have to find what fits for your product, and that's why I call it business model market fit. How to sell
Mm.
one product won't work for a different product a lot of the time. So it's finding those things that works for you and your product.
Yeah, thank you. That's loads of really great insights in there. It sounds like this is probably the phase in your journey where you've started to really consider going non-clinical. And could you talk to us what were your perhaps your identity shift from being a clinician to being a software engineer founder, and what were some of the restraints that you had to overcome, be it financial or I don't know what else might be going on in your life at that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm very, very happy to chat about that as well, because I think it's just very practical advice, and it really, I think if you want to start something, or you've started something and you're thinking, when do I make the shift from clinical to full time, or when I make the shift from clinical to half time, so then I can go in to be a founder, etc. I think it's obviously very circumstance specific. Now I was in a position where I could reduce down to 2 days a week, and then I could use that to fund building the Olus platform, and that was I suppose a risk that was taken. But there's other people that would have much higher risk. Like at that time, I didn't have any kids, and I didn't have significant overhead. So I think like very practical advice, which was given to me at the start, is like, right, if you're going to do this, reduce your own personal burn to as low as possible, so that it gives yourself as much time to prove out the value props. Because it's not about like, it's about how many swings that you have, or how many shots on goal you have,
Hmm.
because you're going to get it wrong. And if you have 10 shots on goal over this period of 6 to 12 months, brilliant, because you'll then learn and get it right. If you've only 2 shots on goal, because your personal runway is quite short and you have to get distracted, then
Yeah.
the likelihood of success is a lot lower. It's also about that iteration cycle, the ability to get a shot on goal quickly, learn, realize what your mistakes you made, and then get another shot on goal.
Yeah.
The ability to move that fast is important. So yeah, the advice I got was reduce your personal burn, and do that. But I was in a situation where yeah, some other people maybe aren't in that situation. They have to navigate that the way they need to.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I love the perspective shift in there as well, because you suddenly start thinking about like, how do I actually fail faster, knowing that I'm probably going to fail 9 out of 10 of those shots. So how do I do that better? How do I do that faster? And how do I learn faster from that? Is so different from what see many clinicians try and do. Like they're still grinding really hard clinically. They've got this wonderful idea. They're really trying to make it work, and they're like, I've got just one shot. I'm going to really do that really well, and it's going to solve everything, and it's going to make me so much money. I can leave my clinical practice, but it almost never happens that way.
Yeah,
And it's always just about like, how can you do it more often, and how do you extend that runway that you've got?
100%.
Um,
And I
yeah.
think I think that taps into the psyche of who we are as medics. Like the vast majority of us are, maybe they aren't. Maybe it's just me. But like, goody two shoes, a students in school. You want to do the right thing. You want to make sure you get the right exams, etc., etc. And you just go through this path. And what you're trained into being how how right can I be all the time? I need to be 99% right all the time. And if I'm 1% wrong, that might cause someone to die, because
Yeah.
that's how we're trained. And I think that fundamental shift from going from that clinical mindset to a business mindset, which is almost the complete opposite, which is I'm probably going to be wrong 90%
Most
of
of the
the time.
time.
Yeah, most of the time I'm going to be wrong, but I have to find a way to, as you said, fail fast and be wrong in a safe way.
Yeah.
And then that 10% of the time is where the value actually lies. That's very different from how we were trained from, from no age. So I think that fundamental shift in how people think and the risk appetite is something that needs is an adjustment that we needed as a team, I think.
Interesting. And so the rest of your team, are they also clinicians?
Yes, so we have 7 people in the team. 5 of us are doctors, and
Okay.
then 4 out of the 5 are software engineers as well.
Wow. And were you all engineers first, or was that something you learned later as a result of Olus taking off?
No, so it's learned engineering, before Olus. So we
Okay.
coded, developed solutions, etc. before Olus, and then
Yeah.
people joined the team as we grew.
That's really interesting. I just I'm begging. The question is begging to be asked. What made you go from being an engineer first to then becoming a doctor, and was it a disappointment on the other side?
Yeah, no. So I through school, I did a lot of coding and did computer science, and was either going to do computer science or medicine as a as a career. So I went down the medicine path. Absolutely loved medicine and was hurtling down that path. I was doing ED. I wanted to eventually dual train in ICU. That was what I found really a lot of interest in. And then I started coding again. So I hadn't coded maybe all through uni, but started coding again about 6 or 7 years ago, and fell in love with it. Really loved the state of flow that you get into when you do it. Really loved the ability to have nothing on a page, code up something, and then in the real world it solves a problem, and that's really addictive. So it was really a pull from that. But there was also a pretty significant push. You're sitting in ED, you're seeing 15, 20 patients a day. There's hundreds of patients to be seen constantly, and they're just kind of coming through the system, and
Mm,
you're kind of thinking there must be a better way to support this as a system. Software has a large part to play in this, and AI has a large part to play in it moving forward. And it was really that opportunity. It was kind of in and around the convolutional neural net days when AI for radiology was becoming really really big, and yeah, initially coded up a few, like X-ray and fracture detection tools and things like that, and did that. And I realized that actually this is a big massive part to play, and that aspect of it's one aspect. Now with large language models and advanced search, that's another aspect, and there'll be multiple other aspects as the ecosystem grows and evolves. But it's very very clear what path we're on. So there was a pull, but it also was a bit of a push because the system was
mm,
just kind of crumbling around you, and software is inherently deflationary, and I think
yeah.
healthcare needs to really adopt it at scale.
That's really interesting. I think there's so many things in our lives that we kind of strive for, and there's the traditional markets of health, wealth, and happiness, and relationships, and we're kind of always like, how do we get either more time with family, and better health? Um, but the weird thing is that it's almost always the sense of clarity that kind of comes around by trying a bunch of different things, and when that clarity clicks, you're just like, oh, I just know exactly where to spend all my time and effort, and it just kind of takes off from there.
Yeah.
Um, it's been really cool hearing your story with where Eolas got to up to this point, and this is, in my mind, still before you've massively expanded everywhere, and probably around the time when I heard you on the podcast. Was there ever fundraising involved for Olus, and how was that?
Yeah, yeah. So we did 2 funding rounds. So we've raised a pre-seed round of £2.5 million, and then we raised a seed round of £3.5 million, and that's allowed us to rapidly scale across the UK, Ireland, and the US. Allowed us now to start to focus in Europe as well and other geographies. So yeah, so we've been backed by some great investors that have been super helpful as well with regards to that scale up process, and that process of actually building a business around it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, did that kind of fit in with the vision that started to clarify for Olus, your ability and your decision to kind of step away from clinical work? And then did you know that this is where Olus would get to today? Was this the plan you proposed to your fundraisers?
No, so the with regards to when I started coding and launched it, like I had no plans to raise capital. I just wanted to solve the problem that we had, and then found out a lot of hospitals had. I wanted to solve that problem as well. And I suppose over the year, maybe 18 months after initially doing that and solving it, there is a big gap between being a clinician and then jumping into this world, it's very, very
Mm.
different. You come from, as I said, doing your exams in high school, and then doing your medicine, and then coming and being a doctor, and then you worked as a doctor 5 years, and then you realize you haven't really worked in the external world, and things work extremely different. And there was a steep learning curve with regards to that ramp up. And I think if you want to have impact, and if we look at this idea of 2 billion medical decisions, how many of them are informed by medical knowledge? How many of them can Olus help inform? You need capital to do that. You need to
Mm.
build a business. You need to build a structure around that, and you need to align multiple stakeholders in that have sometimes competing incentives, but sometimes complementary incentives. So that scale up process, and that was definitely a learning process for the 12 to 18 months. But if you want to have that level of impact at scale, I think it's very, very difficult to not get that level of impact at scale that you need without raising capital and bringing on the talent that you need. It's not about the money. It's about all of the people that come along on the journey to be able to
Yeah.
help and to help realize that vision. That's what the capital unlocks, obviously.
Mm.
And you've got your own skill sets, but you have a large amount of gaps in skill sets, and that's what you want to fill with your own learnings and expertise, but then with other people that partner with you in the journey, and capital allows you to do that. And that
Yeah.
that makes it really enjoyable as well. It makes you be able to partner with people. Many different people have many different conversations, and actually learn from all of those people, and go on the journey together. And because bootstrapping something like this can be quite lonely.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's not a decision that should be taken lightly.
Mm.
Because it's a big fork in the road. Should I bootstrap this, or should I raise some sort of investment?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting kind of
Yeah,
12 to
it's
18
an
months.
interesting take, especially because it sounds like Olus was doing well. Olus was solving meaningful problems in a realistic way. You were tracking your progress, you were tracking efficiencies, and one might argue that you could just wait for that to kind of grow slow and steady in its
Yeah.
own organic manner. Yet you decided to go down the fundraising route, and it sounds like the key was being able to bring on board people, a team, and be able to fund them to be part of the vision and the journey more than anything else, really.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, really cool. Take us through then to the next phase of when you really expanded. So you got some fundraising, you grew your team, you got the right people, and take us through that next journey, that next expansion. What was crucial to that growth for Olus?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think clarity is the single thing that you need to get as quickly as possible. What's your product market fit? What's your business model market fit? And where do you fit into the world,
Mm,
basically? And trying to get clarity on that as soon as possible is the thing that needs to happen. And that's really what happened in that interim period. Probably about a year ago is where, maybe 9 months ago, we got a large amount of clarity. The clarity that we got was Olus needs to be the largest aggregation of internal clinical medical knowledge that exists on the planet. And what I mean by that is context specific for that hospital, i.e., unique content that doesn't exist anywhere else. So if you look at this medical knowledge mobilization space now is obviously exploding. You have open evidence that have raised hundreds of millions. They're now looks like they're raising another 100 million on a $6 billion valuation. You've got open AI that are clearly throwing their hat in the ring with all their recent hires, and they're going down that route. A really, really, really super interesting space. And so the core focus of all of those companies and all of these companies and that is external medical knowledge,
mm,
licensing JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine, etc., all of that content. And that's brilliant. It helps streamline that knowledge to the point of care, and that's only good for healthcare. All of that knowledge will ultimately be commoditized. You most likely will be able to access that all via ChatGPT. So the
yeah.
thing that's not commoditized is the unique content of, for this patient in front of me in my district general hospital, do I send
Mm,
them to cardiothoracics for their AAA, or do I send them to XYZ for their AAA? Is it in ours?
yeah.
Is it out of ours? And that knowledge is extremely important, as well as the external medical knowledge. So that's
Mm,
ultimately where Olus hyper focuses on, and that's the clarity that we got over the last year or so. So I suppose the reason I'm saying that is that kind of feeds into your next questions that you kind of teed up, which is a where does that put your strategic business decisions in based on that? And
yeah.
Microguide was one of those strategic business decisions, and on other content partnerships that we've done as part of that. So that's what led us down to the path of, okay, where does this unique content live? Can we bring it
Mm.
onto Olus? Then can we use AI to index that and embed it seamlessly at the point of care? So that's the entire kind of framework of what we work from.
Yeah, get clarity on the end goal. What are you trying to achieve? And it sounds like it's still super aligned with where you were right in the beginning, which was like, how do you actually implement the knowledge that's ubiquitously available, and then make all your later decisions, the tactics on the back of that initial strategy. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to showcase people your website, and could you just maybe walk them through what is actually possible with Olus today, and
Yeah.
we'll then get into where Olus is heading next.
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. So, Olus, so what we've now launched is a computer vision based RAG search engine, essentially for healthcare knowledge, and why that's important is a lot of this medical knowledge, especially the internal medical knowledge, as you know yourself, is a Microsoft Word document that says if this happens, do this thing, then if this happens, do this thing. So what we've now launched is the a computer vision model that extracts all of that content and it maintains it in context. So it allows you then to build a RAG-based search pipeline on top of that. So you ask a question, get an answer, but because it uses computer vision, you're able to visually ground every single answer that you ever get. So that's now what we've launched into hospitals. It's called Ask Olus, and allows you to ask a question, get a natural language answer within seconds based on your unique content. So any hospital departments can sign up. They can just click create a space and automatically get signed up. Any individual users can also do that as well. So they can download the app and they can get access to the external medical knowledge. So, nice guidelines, all of the national level guidelines, etc. So they can ask questions of that content and get answers as well. So that's kind of where the platform is now. Where this is then taken to is okay, you have all of this knowledge, it's human readable and it's machine readable. So that's the most important thing here. The thing that all of these technologies have done is um, they've unlocked the text as as a way to represent knowledge. Previously,
Mm,
over the last kind of 10 years, a lot of knowledge mobilization strategies has tried to use lots of different technologies to represent knowledge so that it was both machine and human readable. Now that we have large language models, text is the fundamental ubiquitous representation of knowledge. So
mm,
what you can then do with that is if you make it machine readable, you can make that knowledge embedded at the point of care. So if you imagine an ambient listener or electronic health record takes the patient note, you anonymize the patient note, send it to Olus's knowledge base via the API, and then in real time we can then send back, hey, for that patient in front of you, based on your hospital guidelines, policies, and procedures, this is the next best step for that patient.
wow.
So that's really the direction that we're traveling in, and that's what we're excited about most. So that brings you onto the spectrum of patient data and medical device regulation.
Mm,
That brings you onto that, but you can't have really deep, true, meaningful, lasting value in healthcare at the point of care for decision support unless
yeah.
you actually go along that path, especially in Europe and in the EU. So that's the path that we're now on, essentially.
Wow.
So we're quite excited about that.
Sounds like you're ready for it as well with everything else that you've grown. And yeah,
Yeah, no,
that's
100%.
very cool. Yeah, it takes me back to the time when I heard that our intranet was being replaced by SharePoint. We were going to get Copilot as like the AI assistant. And I said, finally, I can go to Copilot and be like, this patient with a hand fracture, do they go to plastics or do they go to whatever? And it's like, please read all of the documents that are already on SharePoint. So
Yeah,
just tell me where do I refer this patient or what number do I dial?
yeah,
But unfortunately, it still doesn't do that, and I still had to fight with the really horrible search platform and read through thousands of documents, half of which had expired, to try and figure out what my current guideline was, where I called them, and what do I tell the patient. And and integrating all of that is, I want to say, it's not even 2025. It sounds like a 2020 thing that should have already happened.
yeah,
We're
yeah, yeah,
just
exactly.
late to it.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%.
That is super cool. Yeah, this has been such a fantastic conversation so far already, Declan. I'm going to just invite our listeners to put in any questions they've got for you. And I'm going to have a quick check and see if people on YouTube have any questions for you as well. But what I'd like to do next is to kind of hand over the mic to you and let you ask me a couple of questions about whatever you want to ask me about. And actually, before that, is there anything else about Olus that we haven't covered yet that you'd like our listeners to know?
No, I suppose we've gone through a lot of the journey. I think we will now be expanding the team as well. I suppose is one aspect of it, and we're always looking for really intelligent, driven people that want to use technology to make a change in healthcare. So feel free to reach out to me directly. Always happy to get a chat with anybody. So I think that's one thing. And I think having a clinical background is extremely valuable. Of having felt the problem is super powerful. So always happy to get a chat with someone as we're expanding the team.
Yeah, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Just message me on LinkedIn. Might take a few days, but I should get back, and then we can jump on a call.
Awesome. Brilliant. Yeah, so while I'm waiting for questions to come through, because there's always a bit of a delay, let's move into the next bit where feel free to ask me whatever you want to.
Yeah. No, 100%. So I think I think you are in a very interesting position with regards to there's a ground truth of building in this space, and everything maybe that I've said, that's just one perspective on things, and that's just one aspect of a Venn diagram. Then you have everyone else that you've interviewed and talked with. All of those opinions then are overlapping Venn diagrams, and I suppose the middle is where the ground truth is here. So
Hmm.
really interesting to hear from your point of view, what is what are the common themes that you see from founders that make them successful in healthcare, going from an idea and a problem through to execution, through to scale? Like, what's the kind of ubiquitous, repeatable things that you constantly keep seeing?
Yeah, I love that question. That's such an interesting way to look at it. Um, I guess there's two things that come up for me. One is that even though we're all kind of on a new journey every time, there's new pain points, new problems. In a way, they're not very different from everything else that I guess humans as a whole have kind of created. Like everything from like being able to share an idea, be a leader, get people to buy into your vision, agree with what you're talking about, is has kind of been around since we ever existed. Like at one point we used to kind of stand in the middle of town and just kind of shout our ideas, and our competitors would stand on the other side, and wherever whoever people agreed with more, they would kind of surround and aggregate around that person. And that was the show of your value, your credibility, your acceptance. And now it's essentially the same thing. It's just kind of shifted online. So in a way, we're kind of still being human beings in that sense. And there's all of those elements, and there's lots about the business processes and business models and everything else. Like I think as far as new information or new ways to do things goes, there's rarely something new or different. It's just how you're applying it to your context. And I think that application is where a lot of the stumbling blocks are, and where a lot of the challenges lie. So I think that's one thing that's coming up for me. And the other thing that's coming up for me as I'm thinking back on all of the stories of the clinician founders and all my clients and everyone else I work with is this odd sense of audacity, which in the nicest way exists for people who are willing to break out of their own mold, or like the mold that other people see them in. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today, and even though they've not been a dentist for like the last 10 years, the thing that people just want to have a conversation with them about is like, oh, how have you gone from being a dentist to doing this? And it's just that mold that everybody puts other people into, and we tend to put ourselves into. And it's about the audacity of going like, oh yeah, fine, I grew up in India, went to university in India, but like I had the audacity to come to the UK, and I had the audacity to leave my training post, to go into management consulting. I had the audacity to like do a startup and actually take it to somewhere where all the way to Stanford. And who am I to do that, is the question that really successful clinician founders don't ask themselves. And I think that's the other bit that comes up when I'm thinking about what's been successful. um, Kind of just going back to the framework section of it, like if we're actually following the process from idea to implementation and successfully scaling a business, there are existing frameworks. And like I did a lot of quality improvement work, trained in quality improvement, and it also kind of stems from really diving deep into the problem and spending a lot more time on what the problem is. What is it that you're trying to solve? What is it that you're trying to achieve? How are you going to make your decisions? What are the underlying values in that? Having clarity there, that then leads you to making the right decisions in the next few steps. So yeah, essentially finding the problem, finding the people. And for me personally, it always comes down to the people, spending time with the people, understanding the people, getting to know them. I think these are a couple of the common themes that tend to come up. But it's a really good question. I've been thinking about like, oh, I should write a book about this. Like, what have the conversations with 30 clinician founders led to so far? And I might actually talk about this at a conference in October, the Developing Your Portfolio conference. So yeah, I don't know. That's a half baked answer for you there,
Yeah.
but yeah, good question.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I think yeah. So I think there's probably a lot in this space in general. You know, you have every kind of startup-y type resource and podcasts and books and everything. You know, there's lots of things you can read, and it's taken that in assimilation. I think the big point is what you made around the application of that in your own context. You know, where are those things important and where are those things not applicable? So I suppose that's another question to yourself. You know, out of all of the external, this is how you build a startup. Views, because in health tech at the minute there's a massive culture clash that's now happening with regards to tools that are going direct to clinicians. So you have Silicon
Hmm.
Valley based firms raising hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollar valuations and just giving the tool to doctors. 50% of doctors in the US use Open Evidence, for example.
Hmm.
And they're now moving into the scribe bit, which is capturing patient data. Is that regulated? You're working inside a hospital. That's now starting to really clash with the enterprise level software model that usually worked in healthcare. You're getting scribes as well, so multiple different scribes that have a product led growth motion where it's free for a certain amount for doctors. Doctors take them up, and then the
Yeah.
CIOs of hospitals say, "Wait a minute, these doctors are employed by our hospital and they're using unverified, unsafe,
Yeah.
potentially unsafe, ambient listeners to take their notes." So there's this big, massive clinician wave. So you're getting this huge wave of direct to clinician clashing with what historically is just a very very entrenched B2B enterprise software type models.
Yeah.
So I think that sliver or that front, or that that confrontation front
Hmm.
is interesting to explore. What's different in Silicon Valley than healthcare? There's lots of things that you can take from Silicon Valley and other things, but like, where are the things that no, you actually can't do that, or that's different, etc., etc. So navigating that, and I suppose it's not really a direct question, but it's more of an
Yeah.
observation of trying to navigate that. And every
No.
geography will be different just from a regulation point of view, but I think there's a really interesting time that's happening at the minute in healthcare technology in general. I think the belief now is it's been here for 15 years with Google's EHR and lots of other players trying to get into healthcare and into that space, and they've tried and ultimately failed. But now
Hmm.
there's this second wave again, which is right in the wave of AI of let's do this again. Let's try to
Yeah.
revolutionize healthcare technology, and it's really interesting to see what will be the fallout from that. Where the common patterns, where the things that just won't work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's reminding me of this concept of trends and narratives that they talk about in investment banking, I suppose, with narratives being the long term vision, essentially the stories we tell ourselves. So, for example, democratization of power is one of the stories that we as a human race tell ourselves. We generally are currently in times majority people believe that there should be decentralization of power, that one person shouldn't have the bulk of the money or the ability to make decisions, and hence democracies exist. And for example, blockchain or Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is a representation of that. And so in itself, it feeds into the narrative that we've always kind of held for ourselves, and that's why it's kind of taken off. And when it takes off, it's kind of a trend. So the reason blockchain worked or the reason Bitcoin worked is because the trend fit into the larger picture narrative. And I wonder if there's an element of that in here as well, where the narrative is that, we are individual practicing clinicians. At the end of the day, we are employed by other people, but we're also individuals in ourselves. And perhaps the ability for with AI and the changes in technology and the way we can kind of price things and structure things and actually reach people has perhaps enabled a new trend which is feeding into that bigger narrative. And if that is the case, then that's probably a trend that's going to grow and really benefit a lot of other people. So yeah, I always like to think about like what is the underlying trend with the kind of things that are happening and why they're happening and what's different about it. I don't know
Yeah,
if that stirs up
yeah, yeah.
ideas for you.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's a good narrative, and I think the and a colleague of mine framed this through bundling and unbundling of software and healthcare technology kind of happens in waves. Everything's
Mm,
centralized. The HR is not solving all the problems. Then you get in these AI knowledge bases, AI scribes, etc., all offering. Then you get unbundling, and then that's it all comes to a point again. So
yeah.
we're now kind of this phase of unbundling where the clinicians are adopting all of these tools themselves because of the narrative that you've kind of said, and I agree with. Ultimately, where does it bundle back to? And it depends. I think it depends to an extent on the geography, because of the regulation, because of the laws, and because of the approach to privacy and everything else. Because there is, as you said, there's a autonomy as a clinician to choose the tools that you want to choose. But then there's also the regulation of like choosing a tool, putting patient data on it, and then your hospital firing you because you're not allowed to use that tool because you can't do that. And that's what I think that's it'll start to bundle back towards this. And
Yeah.
wait, what does it bundle back towards? Probably Epic and Microsoft. Let's be honest. Bundles
Mm.
back towards that, and everyone then procures that. So, but it's a really interesting concept how it comes in waves as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world and fascinating time we're living in. I think it's never been easier to reach out to an individual as an enterprise, and at the same time, it's never been easier for an individual to reach out to the masses without being an enterprise as
Yeah,
well at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah.
So super interesting times ahead, and what it means for medicine and the way we use information. And I think Olus is existing in a really exciting time as well, and I'm super keen to see where Olus heads to in the future and where it goes to next. And yeah, just very thankful for you to have this conversation with us today and for sharing all this with the world and making it happen and inspiring our listeners. And, if anyone's got questions for Declan, please reach out to him on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to reach him. And I'm sure I've got lots of listeners on other platforms who are listening to this and being like, what sort of a doctor is on LinkedIn? And to them, I say the right kinds are on LinkedIn. So get on LinkedIn if you aren't already. This
You can shoot me
podcast,
an email as well. So, Declan at olusmedical.com, EOLAS at medical.com. So feel free to email me too if that's easier.
brilliant.
Thanks
That
very
would
much.
be
Yeah, thanks for
super
having me on.
cool.
Really appreciate that too. Great chatting.
Yeah, no, thank you. So, with that, I'm going to say that's a wrap for today. Thanks, Declan, for taking the time to take us from your journey of going from ward rounds to shipping software that hospitals actually adopt. And if this sparked ideas, follow or subscribe and share the episode with a colleague who'd benefit. Our next live episode is on Tuesday, the 9th of September, so a week from now at 11:45 a.m. Once again, we're going to have Dr. Andy Egwim, founder of MoneyWise Doctor, talking to us about how he built MoneyWise Doctor. He's an entrepreneur and investor helping medics avoid costly pitfalls with tax smart, common sense investing and simple money systems that reduce stress. Set a reminder, bring your questions, and I'll see you live next Tuesday. Once again, a massive thanks to Dr. Akash Vijayan for the intro music to this podcast. Check out his work on Spotify and SoundCloud. Until then, keep building, stay bold, and remember, you have the power to create something extraordinary. See you soon.